How do you feel when your boundary was crossed? How do you feel when you know you need to set a boundary, but you haven't, or you haven't communicated that boundary? Oh, yes, as a highly sensitive in particular, it is so hard to set boundaries. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, right? Because when you don't set boundaries or when your boundaries get crossed, you feel angry, you feel frustrated, you feel weak, you just feel like unwell, mostly overstimulated. It's not a good feeling. So today, day 15 of 33, feeling empowered as a highly sensitive being, we will be talking about three things, right? Why do we need boundaries? And why do highly sensitives have a harder time setting boundaries? And then number three, how do you set a boundary? Such an important topic. Hi, my name is Christine. I'm your emotion coach. I'm so excited to be with you on this 33-day journey. You're almost halfway through. Amazing. If you have done the work up until now, even just listened to these days, gotten these new ideas in your mind, fantastic. This is like the core of everything that I teach, all wrapped up in 33 days. I was trying to make them more bite-sized, smaller pieces, but this is such valuable information. When you hear it the first time, it might be a little bit overwhelming. The point is to listen to it again and again in order to really distill it down to the basics. This is why I give you that cheat sheet, right? I have everything written with it, your step by step, what we talk about, the outline, so that you can get it down to like, oh yes, this was the point. That was the most important. Yes, I can understand the value of it, and I know exactly how to implement the pieces and make them work for me. So let's jump right into it. Number one, why are boundaries important, right? Because when you discover the why, then you're more likely to want to set boundaries. I am somebody who is a freedom-seeking being, and I used to be like, boundaries? That sounds way too closed in for me, way too limiting. I do not like boundaries. Boundaries was like a dirty word for me. I'm like, oh, boundaries, no thanks. Since then, I have discovered the value in them, particularly when you have a kid, because not everything with a kid, raising them in a society to be decent little human beings, does not come natural. So there are a lot of boundaries that we need to set, and there are good things. Boundaries doesn't have to be a thing, right? Because as a highly sensitive, we kind of feel like, ugh, it's uncomfortable. And we will be talking about that. We will be talking about why you get that cringy feeling when you hear boundaries. So what do they do for us, right? Why do we need to set boundaries? Point number one is it helps us not to feel overwhelmed or overstimulated, right? We need to set those boundaries of, I'm only going to go out on those days, right? When I haven't had a crazy busy long day already. I'm only going to stay in this busy restaurant or busy store or busy play place for my kid for so and so many hours, because I know if I stay longer, I'm going to go into overstimulation, right? A boundary can be as simple as that of like, how many hours? When am I ready to do this, right? Not always so easy to communicate when it's a friend going, hey, you haven't been out with me in so long. I need you to come out with me this Friday night, you know? I'll talk about communicating boundaries, but at first you have to realize, why is it important, right? So this first point is to keep you from going into overstimulation, right? It kind of protects your energy and well-being. Second point, this one's really important. It helps you to distinguish, like a boundary will help you to distinguish between your emotion and somebody else's, right? Remember day 8 where we talked about not like slipping into somebody else, like not being overtaken by somebody else's emotion? Well, a boundary is exactly that. You're going to set that boundary. How often do I visit my sick friend? How long do I stay? How often do I interact with a person who is on this like negative trend, right? How long do I stay on the phone with somebody when I feel like it's pulling me down, right? This is a boundary that needs to be set. How much empathy, how much pain am I going to allow myself to go in before I pull back and decide that my own well-being is really important? Or even just like setting a boundary with yourself of like, how much news am I going to watch? Even just like YouTube has been queuing up these like animal rescue videos for me, which some of them are like fascinating and beautiful stories, especially when they end up well. But even that, like, ooh, those initial pictures of like where they find that animal, and you don't always know if it's gonna end up well, right? Whew, I need to set a limit, a boundary for myself of like, how often am I going to click on one of those videos to watch it, right? Or even just social media in general, right? How much time are you willing to invest in this? Which is already the next point, right? Boundaries are great for managing your time and really deciding where you want to spend your time. It also gives you a clear kind of delineation, a clear boundary between time for me, right, self-care, and time with others, right? That can sometimes be difficult to manage, especially when you're an introvert, because you need so much more time as a highly sensitive and an introvert, right? But it is important to understand, how much time do I need for myself? How much time do I want to spend on exercise? How much time do I need for sleep? How much time do I need preparing healthy food for myself, right? Those kind of things. How much time do I enjoy being with others? Setting boundaries, knowing your limits, knowing your needs. This is why boundaries are so important, because they help you to reinforce feeling good. And then the last point I put down here is it boosts your self-worth. If you get good at, if you embrace boundary setting boundaries actually boosts your self-confidence, your self-worth, because you are saying to yourself, I am worth it. I value myself. I am worth this time. I am worth me saying no to this thing because I know it won't positively impact my life. And I know that highly sensitives have a really hard time with being selfish. I have been called selfish a few times in my life by people where it really hurt, right? People who are really close to me, people who are in my family, people who know me, you would think. And being called selfish is really hard. Yes, it gives you kind of a point of view from somebody else where you can use that as a checkpoint of like, have I been focused that much on myself? But also as like, well, how much do I need? And being highly sensitive, we're naturally having to be a little bit more focused on self because we get overstimulated in noise, or in traffic, or with lights, or with music, or too many people around, right? We know ourselves, we know where we get overstimulated, so we're gonna have more needs, so we have to focus on self in order not to go into crazy overstimulation, right? You could argue that it's gonna be to everyone else's benefit because you don't wanna be in a noisy, crazy, wild place and all of a sudden get overstimulated and go into like freak out mode, right? So, and also just the people who are around you who want to go out, have a fun evening. And if you get overstimulated, even if you don't make a scene or scream, which we usually don't, but you might withdraw, right? You might sit there and they're like, are you not having a good time? What's going on? And you're like, oh, it's just too much, right? That's when it's good to communicate and to set a boundary and to know your limits. And I wrote that down somewhere, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. it comes back to, we are talking about self-worth, right? So often we already feel like we are having to limit ourselves, like we are weaker. We can't do as many things because of this overstimulation, right? So then communicating that to others is going to be like, I'm going to have to admit this. But if you come back to embracing, right? This is kind of what we established in the first couple of days of this journey of 33 days, and we'll keep talking about it. We'll definitely have another day where we deeply talk about self-worth and accepting the self and accepting this incredible trait. If you're deciding that this trait is really worth it, because you can't really change it, you can mask it, but you can't really change it. It's fundamentally who you are, how your brain works, until unless you do some crazy reprogramming. But why abandon your truth, your roots, your core, right? So we gotta find the positive about it and then decide, I don't feel weak, I don't feel limited, but I know what I need. Yes? Yes. This whole taking more care of self versus others and being called selfish, right? I always tell my coaching clients, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you don't take care of yourself, eventually you come to your limits. If you are a parent, you know this one well, because we give and we give and we give, and then eventually you're going, I can't do this anymore, right? And then we flip into the opposite. We don't want to push ourselves to the point of overstimulation, right? My kiddo loves going to indoor play places, and I would just give in, and I know he needs it. It'll be a good exercise. We're not watching TV. We're being active. He can socialize, all these things. But I would get crazy overstimulated, and I would dread going there. And so I eventually just had to set a boundary. Also money, right? This is a big cost. I was like, we're only going to go once a month, right? And then I can schedule it during a time where I know I have some time before and after to kind of fill up, to kind of get down from being overstimulated. Timing, right? What was the other thing? Yes, this is another great example. If you're just feeling so guilty about spending so much time for yourself, on yourself, with yourself, right? Remember, there are seasons of life. What kind of season are you in right now? Does this season require more self-care, right? Are you working on a master's degree? Are you going through an illness right now? Are you going through grief? What is it that you're going through at the moment where you might need, are you going through a breakup? You might need a little bit more self-care, looking inward, introspection, time for yourself with a journal or reading, whatever it is, right? But then that's another thing to be aware of, and then to communicate, right? To your family who might be worried, or your friends who's you never come out anymore. Just be like, I'm in this season. It's not going to last forever. I just need a little bit more time to really deeply focus on myself. Think about an Olympic athlete. Can you imagine how much time they spend on training, on their body, on food, on, you know what I mean? It's this is a focus period in their life where everything is about that goal. Do we call them selfish? No, we call them dedicated, right? Same with a musician honing his craft, trying to get into the business, right? There, all of a sudden, it's okay. So why is it not okay for you? You are worth just as much. Your life is just as valuable as anybody else's. Your expression is just as valuable. And I bet you, highly sensitives, we always come back around to how can this also benefit the community, right? There's so many artists among us. When we take that time for introspection to where we can then share with others, it benefits others. It benefits those around you. And just, oh my gosh, I really learned this going through the teachings of Abraham Hicks, right? My beautiful spiritual teacher, channeled being. And they say, you have to feel good. If you don't feel good, you don't have anything to give, right? Even just the act of putting in the work to elevate your own mood, your own vibration, your own emotion every day, it's work. It's a lot of work. But does it benefit others? Yes, it does. It does. You know it does. When you're in a good mood, you radiate it. It benefits others. So why not be selfish? Set the boundary. Take the time for yourself. Yes. Okay, let's move right along into point number 2. Why do we have a harder time as highly sensitives to set boundaries? Understanding this will give you, it will let you give yourself some grace, right? You're going to be like, oh yes, I understand why this is hard, and then you can say, this is hard and I can still do it, right? This is hard and this is why it's hard. But step number 1, I know why this is important, so I'm going to decide to do it, right? So why is it harder? Number 1, I invite you to journal. I invite you to do the introspective work, because this is going to be very individual. There's some basic points that probably apply to quite a few of us, but I want you to take your journal and to ask yourself, what are the areas in my life right now where I need to set some boundaries, right? What are the areas in my life? Look at day 1, 7 key areas. What are the areas in my life where I'm feeling unwell or anxious? Probably that means I need a boundary somewhere, right? Think about the people in your life. Think about, just where you feel unwell. Where do I need to set a boundary, and what would that look like? A lot of times it's also about time. It's about empathy with other people, right? It's about food, sleep, exercise. Those are kind of the basics of yes, where do I need to set boundaries? One of the reasons why it's so hard as a highly sensitive to set boundaries is because we don't want to disappoint others, right? Especially people who are close to us, like my kid, I hate disappointing him. He loves going to indoor play places. It'd be a good thing for him. I hate to disappoint him, right? Or we hate to disappoint a friend when we don't want to go out to dinner that night. We hate to disappoint. But even in that, journal more. What is underneath that? And how can you kind of rectify that, right? With my kid, it took me a while to shift my mindset to be like, well, is that the only way that he can have fun and socialize? Can I find other places that won't be so crowded and overstimulating to me? Ooh, even like going outside somewhere to a big playground. That might work better for me, right? Find other solution, find a win-win. Communicate clearly with your friend and plan ahead to be like, oh, this last minute stuff usually doesn't work for me because it depends on what kind of day I had, because I'm highly sensitive and I get overstimulated and I want to have a good time because I enjoy my time with you. So can we plan ahead? And then I'll make sure that I take time, set that boundary, take time beforehand so that I'll be charged up and I'll be ready to go, right? Yes. Another reason why we have a tough time setting boundaries is because we don't like conflict, right? We kind of try to avoid conflict. We feel better when others feel good. This goes back into day 8. It's still up. Go listen to day 8 of how to not be so affected by everybody's emotions. It comes down to setting that boundary and deciding that I am not responsible for how other people feel. I am not responsible for anybody else's happiness except for my own. That even goes with your kid. Of course, we want to fill their basic needs depending on the age of the child, right? Yes. And there are definitely things we can do for our family, friends in order to help uplift, but it's not our job. We couldn't do it 24/7, could we? We cannot be their only source of happiness and content and well-being. What other people feel is up to them. It is their choice, just like it is your choice. All these tools we've been working on, day 5, day 6, how to shift your mood, your emotion, what you're feeling on the inside, giving you the tools of how to shift. Everybody else has access to these tools as well. It is really up to everybody else to decide what kind of a mood they are going to be in and how they're going to be affected by the boundary that you set. That is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to know what you need and to communicate that clearly and kindly, right? There's always the way that how we say it, how we communicate it. Why else? Why do we have a tough time setting boundaries? I mean, this kind of goes in with what we're already been saying. We have this desire to please others. And if this is really strong within you, right, this particularly also goes for people that you might not even be that close with, right? It might be like somebody at the school who like needs volunteers and we're just overcommitting because we have this desire to please, right? Or at your workplace, wherever it might be, we have this desire to please. I invite you to journal about it. What's underneath it? What am I really trying to accomplish in this? Why do I feel the need in order to overcommit? You know, is there a way for me to not overcommit, to like do part of this, but not all of this? And how could I communicate that clearly? And then always this question helps me. Would I want others to do this for me when I know that their heart isn't in it? When I know that that would like exhaust their energy? When I know that it would not be a joyful experience for them? Would I want others to do this? That gives you kind of a clear indication, right? Of like, is it worth it for me to kind of let ourselves off the hook? Because so many times we have so much like higher standards for ourselves than we do for other people. The fear of rejection, that's another big one, right? The fear of rejection, that kind of goes into one of our like basic fears of like, I already feel so different. I feel broken. I feel like there's something odd with me, right? This fear of rejection, of being cast out, right? Of like when you finally like kind of find your group a little bit, or especially if it's like in your kid's school or somewhere where it's important to kind of be a part of it. It's that fear of rejection, why we don't set boundaries and why we overcommit. But then can you find a different solution, right? Can you, with your coach, with your therapist, with your significant other, with your friend, with your journal, can you figure out a solution that works for you to be like, this is important to me because of this, but I have needs. Here are my needs. How can those two coexist, right? And is that fear of rejection actually valid? So many times we just fear that rejection when in reality, it really wouldn't cause rejection at all. So even look at that. Is it even true? Perfectionism, that's another point of why we have a harder time. I kind of hinted at that one, right? We have a harder time setting boundaries because we don't like to admit that we can't do it all, that we don't want to seem weak. We don't want to seem incapable, right? Particularly in the workplace of like, you already feel like you're, am I pulling my share? Am I pulling my load? And you're just like, continuing to take it on of like, I don't want to seem like I can't handle it, right? But it really, you have to see if it's healthy for you, right? How many people exhaust themselves to a point of having a serious illness because they're not listening to their bodies or getting to a breaking point where they never want to walk into this workplace again, right? We have to find our own limits. And with this, with perfectionism, with just like, maybe you're even like overcommitting to a point where you wouldn't have to do this much in order to still have a very good standing in your job. So why are you doing it? If it's really just coming from this place of not wanting to seem incapable or weak or unable to handle that amount of load, check in with yourself. Check in with yourself. Is there a part of your high sensitivity that you haven't embraced yet, right? That you can truly, honestly say, being highly sensitive is a good thing. And it does come with some challenges, with some limitations that I get to take in consideration in order to then use my gift to the fullest, because when you're working under this perfectionism and handling, like taking on way too much, you know that you can't work at the level that you really want to, right? That level of excellence that you really seek. So why not take less in order to do the kind of work that you really want to do at the level that you want to do it, right? Really journal about it. Think about it. Is this worth it? Oh yeah, that's another note I wrote about perfectionism or overcommitting. It's like, once again, you have to see, why am I doing this, right? What part of my life am I in? What period of my life am I in? What is the most important right now? Look back on your day one, and I'm hoping that you're continuing this for every week, that you're every week at the beginning of the week, you're looking at your 7 key areas saying, what is the most important 1 or 2 areas for this week, for this month? And then when you're in the midst of like overcommitting or feeling that amount of like perfectionism or that drive to take on too much, look at that and say, how does that fit in with my goals, with my intent that I've set for this week, for this month? Is that even part of what will get me to a higher level of fulfillment, right? It's wonderful to check yourself on that, because otherwise our focus goes everywhere, and then we feel unfulfilled at the end of the day, at the end of the month, feeling like we did way too much, we're exhausted, and we don't feel like we have gotten to the things that really matter to us. So when you feel that pull to overcommit, to be perfectionistic in something, can you compare it to, what is the most important for me today, this week, this month, this year? Yes? Really important. And then the last point on this, like, why is it harder for highly sensitives to set a boundary? Well, oftentimes because we're not aware that we needed one. And then when we are in the moment, we're overwhelmed, right? Or if we're in a like chronic state of overwhelm, it's really hard to even like take the time or have the energy in order to set those boundaries, because it does take energy to set those boundaries, right? So if you're in a constant state of overwhelm, it's going to be hard, and highly sensitives more prone to overwhelm, to overstimulation when you don't take care of yourself. So that's why it's harder to set boundaries, which gets us right into our third point of, how do we do it? How do we set boundaries? Step number 1, write it down. Take that time. And if you're in a chronic state of overwhelm, do the things that we talked about on your bliss list, right? 5-minute mood changers. Get more sleep. Decide that it's really important. Look at our first point that we talked about today, why it's so important to set boundaries. You're gonna come to this place where you're like, that's enough. Not anymore. If you're in a chronic state of frustration, you need to set some boundaries. And you'd rather take the time now than being overwhelmed, stressed out, frustrated at the end of the week. If you're super bogged down with everything right now, pick a day in your calendar. Hopefully over the weekend, you'll have a little bit of time. When can I build in an hour, even half an hour of doing some work on boundary setting, right? And then when that time has come, step number 1, journal. Journal about, what are the areas where I need boundaries, right? Where has been the most friction in my life? I'm gonna have like a lot more feelings of overwhelm with my kid. Where do I need to set some boundaries? Like, right? I haven't been getting enough sleep. Where do I need to set a boundary? It's been a little weird with my friend. Where do I need to set boundaries, right? Identify the area where you need to set a boundary. Step number 2, why? Remind yourself of that why. Why do I need to set this boundary? What is currently going on that I decided I'm not going to want to perpetuate anymore? Why do I need to set this boundary? What is it costing me not setting this boundary, right? If I don't set a boundary, how's it going to be? How's it going to continue? How am I going to feel? And then if I do set that boundary, when I set that boundary, how's it going to change? How am I going to feel different? How's the interaction going to be different? Yes? Step number 3, a plan. What am I actually going to do? Like the exact steps of what I'm going to do. What does this boundary entail, right? With my kid, I said, only once a month, we're going to go to an indoor play place and I'm only going to stay for 2 hours, right? You're setting a boundary. Now, if I'm at this play place and we're having a good time and I'm still feeling good at 2 hours, I'm like, oh, I might extend it for half an hour. Don't push it super far. But you have that wiggle room, but you need to set that original, like, oh, okay, I need to set that boundary. Or what time you're going to bed. Or, I don't know, how many snacks you're going to eat during the day, whatever your boundary is, right? Or I'm not going to stay up late with my boyfriend, or I'm not going to watch these particular movies with my boyfriend, right? It's like, what boundaries do you need to set? Why are they important? And what are the steps you're going to take, right? Or if you're saying, I'm not going to go eat dinner past, I don't know, 7 p.m., right? What are the steps? Then you can go backwards of like, well, what time do I want to eat? And in order to eat at that time, what do I need to do before then to be ready for dinner, right? All these things. What are the actual steps that you're going to take that kind of set and enforce this boundary? What does it entail? Step number 4, how can I best communicate this boundary, right? Ooh, this is a big one. I would say honesty and confidence get you a long way. If you can honestly and confidently and kindly tell someone, and this needs practice, right? Practice in front of the mirror, practice saying it out loud, practice with a friend, practice with your coach, practice setting boundary, practice saying it out loud, practice just saying, I'll get back to you, right? This is always how it starts. I still do this a lot. I don't like to get roped into things on the phone. I got to check my calendar. I'll get back to you on that. I need to see if this works for me, right? Always, I heard something that says, always say no first. And that kind of helps me because then I don't overcommit. So then it's like, I'm not sure, I'll get back to you, right? It's like, don't commit. Don't say yes right off the bat unless you know it's going to be an amazing thing and you love doing it, right? Another thing that helps me is to write it out, right? Particularly if it's like with your partner or your friend or somebody who's really dear to you, who you really want to be authentic with and who you know is going to understand you. Can you write it down? Can you write it out? How would you say this in the best way possible? How can you give them a little bit of that? This is why I decided that this is good for me. This is what I need right now. This is what I'm going to do. I would love if you could do this for me, or I would love if you could understand this because this is really important to me, right? And then you can either give them the letter, or when you see them, you can read them the letter, or it's just an exercise for you to just get your thoughts and your feelings around this. You can also compromise. You can brainstorm a compromise with your friend or with your partner of like, this is how far I got. I know that I need a boundary. I know that something needs to change, but can you help me? Can you figure this out? Because I don't want to put you out. I don't want to disappoint you. I don't want to make you feel like this isn't important to me, but this has been a bit much. How can I help on a smaller scale? Or what can I do instead, right? Can I help when others aren't around so I don't get too overstimulated by the noise, right? You can talk about it and you can find a compromise, one of those. When you have that power of talking it out with somebody. Yeah, and then I just invite you to like journal about like, what are your fears about it? What are your fears of how it will be received? Are you worried about being rejected by this person? How do you think this person's going to take it? Are they going to be outraged? Are they going to be angry? It's like, what are you afraid of will happen once you communicate that boundary? Because a lot of times we're just like feel this anxious feeling and don't even know why. But when you journal about what could be the possible effects of me setting this boundary, what kind of pushback am I going to get from other people? And when you can anticipate that, you're prepared for it. Then you can brainstorm, how do I handle it? If she responds like that, if he responds like that, if this happens, how would I respond? And how would I feel? How can I feel about this, right? Oh, such great things to already think about in advance because it helps you to have that confidence. And then remember, you're going to seem a lot more like strong and confident. Set that example of being able to set a boundary. Set it for your kids, right? They notice when you set a boundary or when you don't set a boundary. Do that for your kids. Do it for other people around you. Really be the one setting the example to say, I need time for self-care, right? So often in the beginning, I'd be like, oh, I can't because I'm busy that day, or I already have a commitment. I mean, yes, you can phrase it that way, but you can also say, it's been a busy week. I need some downtime. I need some time for self-care because when I don't take that, I get way too overwhelmed and it's not a good thing. I have to take that time for myself. It's important to take that time for myself, and this is what I'm going to spend the time on, right? Gosh, if we could just communicate, I feel like by now we would just applaud each other and be like, oh, and it gives others the permission too. If you're like, no, I can't make that. That's a day where I promised myself I would lay in the hammock and read a book. And they're like, what? She's taken that time to do that and not help with this? And then hopefully they're doing the work to be like, I want that. I want that time. I need that time. So be the leader, be the example, be bold, be assertive. You can do this. I know you're highly sensitive. You can do this. When you journal about it, when you practice it, when you understand your why, when you understand why it's so important and what it will give you, the freedom that it will give you, right? The feeling that it will give you when you set that boundary and enforce that boundary and beautifully communicate that boundary. Your partner, ooh, he or she is going to be so excited because they know exactly what you need and when you need it. And they're like, oh, she's always in a much better mood when she takes that time for herself. It benefits others. It really does. Let's do a quick review, draw a card, and you will be on your way. Let's review. Why are boundaries important? Prevent overwhelm, overstimulation. It helps with healthy relationships, right? Like my emotion versus somebody else, drawing that boundary of like, this is where I'm going to let myself go. It protects your energy and your time, right? Boundaries protect your energy and time. So important. And setting boundaries boosts your sense of self-worth. I am worthy of taking that time for myself. And your confidence that you can be assertive, that you can say out loud what you need. Number 2, why do highly sensitives have a harder time setting boundaries, right? Journal about it. What is it for you about a specific issue? Why are you having a hard time setting that boundary? Are you worried about disappointing someone? Are you afraid of a conflict? Are you afraid that you'll feel rejected? Do you have that intense desire to please others? Are you a perfectionist and you don't want to seem weak, like you can't do this? Or are you just too overwhelmed in this moment, or in the moment where it would require to set a boundary to where you're like, whatever, I'll just deal with it. This is too much, right? Oof. Number 3, how do you set a boundary as a highly sensitive, right? 4 steps. Step 1, identify where you need to set a boundary. Step number 2, remind yourself of the why. What is it taken from me if I don't set that boundary, right? What is it costing me? What is the pain of not setting this boundary? And what will I get when I do set this boundary? Step number 3, what is this boundary? What does it entail? What am I going to do, right? Definition of a boundary, what I will do, right? Step number 4, how do I lovingly communicate that to the people who are involved with this, right? Communicate. So important. Lots of information. If you need more examples, let me know. We'll definitely keep talking about this. Such an important topic. All right, here we go. I grabbed a bunch of cards. I believe these are Louise Hay, like well-being cards. Let's pick one. Which one do we want? Let's do this one. Oh, interesting. Alrighty. I am at peace with my age. Each age has its own special joys and experiences. I am always the perfect age for where I am in life. I love it. It's kind of in this theme of like embracing yourself where you are, right? In your age, in your particular stage in life, where you are, and how much self-care you might need. Embracing yourself, accepting yourself, loving yourself. You're amazing. You've gone through 15 days with me. We're almost halfway through. Thank you so much for showing up, for doing the work, and for finding this really important that we work on uplifting and empowering ourselves as highly sensitives. Thank you so much, and I'll see you tomorrow.